Hello, and welcome to the Survival to Success podcast. Today, I'm going to talk about something called perfectionism and how to recognize perfectionism in yourself and maybe even in others, and how many delusions people get themselves into not recognizing this perfectionism in themselves. Now, I personally do not like the term perfectionism because it feels like it has a very negative connotation to it. And so it's understandable why people would get into delusions and deny that they are a perfectionist. And this is why I like to use a different term to talk about perfectionism, which is really the cycle of never being enough, the cycle of not enough. And so when I talk about delusions people get into, believe me, I have been there. And I was completely blown away once I learned that I was in this never enough syndrome or this perfectionism. And once I learned about this and realized how it was impacting my life, I am on a mission to help other people to be able to recognize this in themselves and then to really look at how to overcome it and what a person can do about it, and then how to get out of the cycle, because it really does you no good in every area of your life. So let's talk a little bit about what is perfectionism, or what is this never enough cycle that I'm speaking of. Well, it is a personality trait or a way of being that involves a person setting very high standards for themselves. And so really what they're doing is they're striving to have flawlessness in every area of their life. So some people may say, well, how is this a bad thing if you have high standards? And, okay, if a person has high standards and you believe in good quality, but you're really flexible and you adapt and you understand that it's okay for things not to be perfect all the time and you can flow with it and be relaxed, then this is a person with high standards. But this is not what I'm speaking of, because having high standards is far different from being caught up in the never enough cycle or the cycle of perfectionism. And the reason I'm talking about this is because perfectionism or the never enough cycle can have a very negative impact on both our mental health as well as our physical health. And so I'm going to talk about, at some point, all the examples of perfectionism in my life and how it's had such an impact on me and how I was able to move through becoming what I consider a recovering perfectionist, or somebody who's really beginning to believe that they are enough as they are. So when you are super rigid and set expectations for yourself and others, and you have almost like an obsession for needing to control what happens in your life. And a lot of us don't realize, like, we're completely blind that we're doing this. But what happens is there is subconsciously in ourselves this really deep sense of a fear of failure, a fear of making mistakes and maybe looking bad, or making a mistake and looking foolish, subconsciously feeling, like I said, like you're not enough or that you're never enough. And this may lead to things like overworking and overachieving and pushing yourselves to always do better. And so that there's a lot more to that I'll talk about. And also subconsciously not feeling worthy. And the deeper aspect of that is not feeling worthy of love. And because of those things, this leads to a lot of a tendency to have that inner voice, that tendency to self-criticize, because you're still not good enough. You need to do more. You haven't accomplished enough yet. That's not good enough. You have to redo it, And this leads to things like having to continually prove yourself over and over that you're not enough. And this could be things like always talking about what you're accomplishing to people, going to get yet another university degree, and continually pushing yourself to do more and more and accomplish more and more to somehow prove that you're worthy outside of yourself. We don't feel worthy of love. So what happens is we really don't love ourselves, meaning that we are going to attract people into our lives who also have that same feeling about us, unfortunately. And so a lot of relationships will be built on other things that we like relationships that we have throughout our life, the foundation of which will not be love. It will be other things, because that's what we attract when we really believe that we're not worthy of love. And all of these things lead to the need to control the future and what the outcomes are of your decisions. So it's a very powerful drive when we really feel like we're not enough. We don't want to look bad. We don't want to make mistakes. So we overly control outcomes and what we think may happen. And so you can imagine that being in this cycle can have a significant amount of effects on a person's mental health, and how that affects your emotional health has a huge impact on our physical health. Because when we're not in a state of peace, self-love, and well-being, our body is not in a healthy state. Our body is not in a healing state. Our body is in a state where it's more likely to have pain and decline. And we'll talk more about some of the examples of what happened for me in my physical health. So what I want to talk about in this episode is, how is it that you know, or how would you know that you have perfectionist issues or not enough issues that you may be blind to? Being blind means you're not aware, or that you believe something different. So people are very often blind to this. And I know, because I was there. And I see many clients, and I have other people in my life who are also blind to this. So what we'll talk here is about the signs that are not so subtle, and they may even seem obvious, but the person believes in the excuses that they have. And many people are so fixed and rigid in their beliefs about themselves, and they believe that's just how they are, and that they don't see the detrimental side. They don't see the not enough cycle. They don't see the perfectionism. And a lot of times we will hear these people, and believe me, I was one of them. They say certain things about themselves, and they have these stories within themselves that they truly believe. So they may say certain things. And so here's a list of, and I'm going to laugh because I can see so many of these things in myself from the past. And just listen to these statements and see if there's any that sound familiar for things that you say or the things that you hear other people say. So here goes. I don't know why people think I'm a control freak. I just like things to be done a certain way. I'm not afraid of failure. I just want everything to be perfect. I don't want people to know that I struggle with imperfection. It would make me look weak. I don't think I really have a problem with perfectionism. I am just a hard worker. I don't want people to know that I struggle with anxiety. It makes me seem unstable or weak. I don't see why people get so upset when I'm critical. I'm just trying to help. I don't like to ask for help because it makes me feel like I'm not capable or that I'm somehow weak. I don't want people to see that I'm struggling. It makes me feel vulnerable. I don't think I'm a perfectionist. I just have a strong desire to do things right. I don't want people to know that I'm struggling with my mental health. It makes me seem weak. I don't see why people can't just do things the right way. It's not that hard. I don't like to share my weaknesses because it makes me feel inferior. I don't think I'm hiding anything. I just don't share my personal life with others. I don't want people to see that I'm struggling with relationships. It makes me feel like a failure. I don't see why people get so upset when I'm a perfectionist. It's just who I am. I don't like to admit that I'm wrong. It makes me feel foolish. I don't think I'm delusional about my perfectionism. I just have high standards. I don't want people to know that I struggle with insecurities. It makes me seem needy. And the last one, I don't see why people can't just accept me for who I am, flaws and all. And I actually, when I first made this list, I really laughed because so many of these things were things that I would say in the past. But truly, and if you hear other people saying these things and you can see this in them, it's really, there's more of a deep-rooted reason for this because it's the not enough cycle, and that comes from somewhere. And when you say these things, most often you're being delusional about yourself and what it is that you're doing to yourself. And one of my other favorite things that people say is, oh, I don't need any kind of coach or therapist in my life. And you know, I was there too, because the reason they didn't perceive that they need help is because, first of all, well, they're in denial, and they see themselves in a place where they don't see themselves as changeable or even see the need to change. And secondly, ultimately what happens is because they have such a subconscious fear of not making mistakes and not looking bad, that they don't want to expose themselves to anyone who may potentially judge them, no matter what, even if it's a coach or a professional therapist who does confidential work, they don't want to expose themselves to potential judgment. And they want to avoid any challenges that put them into a position where they're exposed or have to look at themselves, or potentially, this is a big one, potentially be seen by someone or even by themselves as not perfect. So when you have people who are very fixed in these ways of thinking, it's very common that self-worth are the deeper root cause of them saying these things. The never enough cycle, the perfectionism. It is all a self-worth issue, because when you feel like you're never enough, that is a low self-worth. And so another clue that a person may be stuck in the not enough cycle or perfectionism is these people will very, very quickly take things personally when others notice things about their life. They notice things about their work, their environment, their patterns. They will very quickly take things personally and get into denial because, again, being perfect is the underlying requirement to be safe. And that's why they often hide parts of their life from people. They hide it from coworkers and the public, and they use the excuse, oh, it's okay, I am just a very private person. So if this is you, or people like this, then the deep-rooted issues of not feeling enough, not feeling worthy, feeling inadequate is really leading to them being blind to it and being stuck in the cycle of delusions and excuses that honestly they've been using for so long that they actually believe them. And I know because I was there. And right now, I'm in my 50s. And I only discovered this and really got help for being in this cycle of not enough like only a couple of short years ago. So I was stuck living in this never enough cycle like for my whole life, and which had a huge impact. And so I'm speaking very openly about this topic and very vulnerably because I am one of those people who was blind to being stuck in this cycle. And I wish somebody would have somehow helped me to become self-aware, to discover it sooner. So it is my mission now to talk about how a person can begin to see that they're in the cycle of perfectionism, that they're in the cycle of lack of worthiness, and that those feelings of not being enough or never enough is having a huge impact on their life, and they don't even realize it. And you know what? I'll be honest. So many people have this issue, and it leads them to a lot of times exhaustion and burnout, and even sometimes decreased motivation in certain areas of their life. And you know what? They're blind to it. Again, they're going to have just numerous excuses as to some external cause as to why they're burnt out, and why they're tired, and it's pretty much never their own fault. And yeah, they just don't realize that they're stuck in the cycle of never being enough, or in the cycle of perfectionism, which is a way of adapting and coping to our life situations. So these are all the things I realized. And what I used to say is, I never believed I was a perfectionist until I finally realized. And so, okay, I used to say many of the above statements, and I believed them because I was also stuck in my own delusions. And I see this very commonly in a lot of my clients as well. especially if there's a past abuse or trauma, or we've had life situations where we looked foolish. Especially as a child, we can use perfectionism as a coping strategy. So that's really important to know. It can be a difficult life circumstance. Having an abusive relationship, it can be many things, but most often it stems from our childhood, our programming, the things that we were told, and the things we were led to believe about ourselves as a result of those things. Because between the ages of 0 and 7, this is those times when we are sponges. We are basically being programmed during those ages. And if we're basically told that we're never enough, or we're punished, or we're led to believe that we're, maybe even good for nothing, once we turn 7, 8, 9 years old, we begin to develop interpretations of ourselves as a result of that programming. And those interpretations can be pretty negative based on our experience. It can be, I'm good for nothing. I'm never enough. Like, no matter how hard I try, no matter how hard I work or how much I do, I'm still not worthy of love. I'm still not worthy of recognition, and I still have consequences, or maybe, it could be beatings, it could be emotional abuse, whatever it is that you experience. No matter how hard you try, you still are never good enough for love, positive recognition. And so we spend our entire lives seeking that because we have those subconscious beliefs. That's how powerful this is. But we live out our whole life like that, like me, not realizing how much it's affecting our life and driving our decisions and driving our behavior. So you can imagine living this way can lead to a lot of underlying stress. Because if you're always trying to be worth something and feeling like you're never enough, and you're setting higher and higher expectations for yourself, where is the self-love and acceptance in all of that? There is none. Because you're so busy trying to prove that you're worth something, working so hard, helping everybody else, putting your needs last, all this stuff, like all the things that perpetuate as a result of feeling like you're never enough. And that's what perfectionism is. And people have this negative feeling towards the word perfectionism. And that's why I call it the never enough cycle, because that's really what it is. So now let's talk a little bit about the impact of this. And so for me, I went through so many years of having pain in the left side of my body, in my hips, in my back, and I was blaming it. I was seeing the doctor. I was, of course I even had CT scans, and I was told I had herniated discs, like as if I'm going to have this pain for the rest of my life. And I was blaming all of this pain on these medical diagnoses and all these physical causes, when really the root cause of this was my own beliefs about myself and my fears of never being enough. It was all the root cause of all the pain I was having and all the physical. And even though we see the evidence on a CT scan that there's a herniated disc, that really doesn't mean anything. Because if you line up 100 people, how many people will have herniated discs or abnormal discs that really cause no pain at all? So it's really boils down to the emotional health of the person. So I also had things like muscle tension. I also had like spasming muscles. I had just like, even though I was, using magnesium and I was doing all these things to try to make myself feel better, it really was not about my muscles. It was really not about the time when I had weakness in my legs, where my muscles were beginning to not function like they should. What it really was about was my emotional state that was buried so deep in my subconscious I didn't realize it was there. And that was the feeling of never being enough. That puts you in such a fearful state, because you're in a constant state of not wanting to make mistakes, not wanting to look bad. And so so you might just call it anxiety. A person may just say, oh, I'm just anxious, so, and they may go get prescriptions for anxiety, or you may have things like digestive issues, the bowels aren't working properly, you may have headaches. And I've had all of these things. And I even had a point where my thyroid was looking like it might be getting low, and I remember thinking, well, thyroid disease is in my family, my mother's side of the family. So, if you believe that you are susceptible to something, it's like you will perpetuate that. You will attract more of that for yourself. So once I realized I was in this cycle, and once I actually got some help for this, because I'll tell you what, this is the crazy part, because once I realized all the expectations I was putting on myself to be perfect, because to not make mistakes, to not be wrong, to never look bad, and the stress, so like the subconscious stress and emotions connected to that is very powerful, because it impacts you 24 hours a day. It impacts your sleep. It impacts your relationships. It impacts your work. A person can't be ultra productive when you're really so worried about everything being perfect, as everything takes you much longer to do. So you're actually quite inefficient at work. And you may not realize that. But this is the thing. Once I realized this and I got help, so being aware was the first step, and then getting help, guess what? Despite this supposed herniated disc that I had and all the other physical findings and diagnosis I supposedly had, guess what? They all went away. Yeah, they all went away. No more back pain, no more neck pain. My muscles are healthier and stronger than they've ever been. And all of that went away because I did something about my emotional health related to the ways I was thinking and the ways I was believing about myself and the stories I was telling myself about the fact that I had to be perfect, and all the emotional outpour from all of those beliefs and thoughts can be very intense. And when a person's in it, they just think they have medical problems. They're seeing the doctors, they're getting all kinds of treatments. But really, it is something deeper down that is ultimately the cause, the root cause of all of that. But they're so caught up in the cycle and seeking the doctors and believing this about themselves and getting caught up in that they don't even, that they're completely blind to the deeper issues that are there. And so this is the thing. The first step towards getting help is to realize, to become self-aware that you are in this cycle of never being enough, and realizing that this is actually a serious issue that is totally treatable with help. And honestly, just becoming self-aware of this for the first time sometimes can be such a shock that we begin to make positive changes to remedy the issue ourselves. Once you're self-aware, you're just like, oh my gosh, and you begin to take steps towards working on that yourself. The second step is to acknowledge that every single one of us benefit from coaching, from therapy, and for developing self-awareness to our blind spots. And this is for every single person, because every single person has blind spots. And this is not just for perfectionism, but this is for all of those layers of programming and beliefs and habits that we developed as a child and through our experiences that can interfere with us having a peaceful, happy, and fulfilling life. And the other thing that it will lead to is, and this is very subtle, but looking after your own needs. Looking after your own needs first, realizing that you are worthy. And also, knowing yourself in a healthy way can lead to you having healthy boundaries for yourself, so that you're not a doormat, so that you're not over-giving to people and really not having any solid boundaries for yourself. So, honestly, let's face it, if we are stuck in a pattern of feeling like that we're never enough, and then as a result trying to hide, over-perfect, over-plan things in such a way that's not even achievable, just to not look bad, not make mistakes, it perpetuates every minute and every second of our lives when we're not aware of this. So this is definitely not the recipe for having a happy and peaceful life to live. And guess what? Your health, both your mental health as well as your physical health, will be very, very deeply impacted by this cycle. So this episode, I wanted to really talk about what this never enough cycle is, and the cycle of perfectionism, which to me is the same thing. I really want to talk about that on this episode and really build that awareness and have people to have those aha moments to say, oh my gosh, that's me. Oh my gosh, I really need to talk to someone, or I need to address this because I can really see myself in all of the things Diane's talking about. So genuinely, if you want to talk to me about your situation, you can email me below at support@dianegoodmanson.com, or we can set up a time to have a connection call, or like I say, meet for coffee online for half an hour and chat openly about it. And honestly, all the work that I do with clients is 100% confidential, and I'm so passionate about helping others to see in themselves the deeper things that are affecting their life, and to really know something can be done about it and how it can transform their life. In the next episode, I plan to talk more about perfectionism and how examples of how I lived in that cycle for years before I finally got help and broke out of that cycle. And in the next episode, I will talk to you about not only how you can help yourself to get out of the never enough or perfectionism cycle, but also what treatments and interventions will work very quickly to turn things around for you, like they did for me. If you want to set up a connection call to talk for 30 minutes, there's no charge, and I will put the link below to my calendar. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you on the next episode.